All right, church family, if you would please turn in your Bibles to the book of Proverbs, and I'm going to specifically point you to chapter 16. If you're using your pew Bible, that's on page 539. Proverbs chapter 16, page 539. That's where we're going to be spending a good bit of our time this morning, although we will, like normal, jump around to a number of different Proverbs here, since they are more topically based. We tend to be divided into two camps of people. This isn't a clean break here, but we tend to be divided into planners or wingers. So which one are you? Let me just ask, how many of you would consider yourself and say, yeah, I tend to be a planner. Like I plan ahead, I've already got like my next 4 months pretty well. Okay, and how many of you would say, I like being more of a winger. I'm flexible, I can totally see you being a winger. Yep, yeah, all right, so we tend to find ourselves divided on one or the other of those camps. And even those of us who would say we tend to be wingers, we recognize we still have plans, we still have hopes, we still have aspirations and things that we're kind of tooling away at. But sometimes when we think of planning or winging it, even our definitions of that change based on, are we thinking big picture or kind of in the micro moment this week, or my life in general. What Proverbs has to say about planning is, I think, just delightfully refreshing. And I think a perspective that we really need to hear, because we tend to think in extremes when we think of this topic specifically. A couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to go out to Gettysburg I was with a number of pastors for a purpose. But one of the benefits of our trip was to get to tour for just a short while the battlefield there in Gettysburg. And one of the tour guides gave this really interesting perspective on how he believed that, there's so many different factors in this battle, which happened in 1863 on July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So here we are, this is 4th of July weekend. This is, if you think about it, this is kind of the anniversary of that great battle, that decisive battle in the turn of events for the Civil War. General Lee had commanded on day 3. He had been advancing against the Union Army from the west to the east, and they were winning for the most part. The South was winning. They were dominating the field. They were kind of taking in on the flanks, and he had a plan to basically kind of flank the Union Army, what was left of the Northern Army, and then kind of roll them up, and what was left of them, to roll them like really tightly, really neatly, roll them up by flanking them on both sides. And it all depended on a couple of his generals just following orders at specific times. So he goes to General Longstreet and says, listen, you're first. I want you to take your men and go take that hill. And all the way on the southernmost flank, and then he knew, I'm going to have you do that tomorrow morning, and then about midday I'm going to start this charge right down the middle, and one thing's going to lead to the next, and we're going to take this thing. We're going to have this sweeping, decisive victory. General Longstreet, had his own mind about the matter, and he said, you know what? I think this is a horrible idea, and he journaled this. And we have this in writing. He said, this is a bad idea for so many different reasons. And he lists off all these reasons. And he says, my men are tired. The enemy already has this hill. There's no way we're going to take it. We already tried this, on day 2. It's not going to happen on day 3. And on he went about all these reasons why he didn't want to do what he was told to do. And so he delayed. And instead of going in the morning of the 3rd day, he didn't get his act together and didn't get his troops together until later in the afternoon. But by that time, Lee had already started moving forward with his forces right in the middle of the enemy line. And they were getting wiped out. I think something like 5,000 men fell in 45 minutes. And if historians will look back and debate what happened, who was wrong, who was right, how everything happened. But if you think about and put it in context of the idea of plans and planning, And you start, it makes you kind of wonder, well, who was really in charge? And whose fault was it that this didn't happen or this happened? And if you think about it from a bigger picture, if I'm a Christian, if I believe in God, if I believe God exists and that he is sovereign, if he was in charge of that day, which we would say of course he was, then whose fault really was it? Could you blame Longstreet? If God already knew from before time began how that day on July 3rd in 1863 was going to turn out and what Longstreet's decision was going to be, did he really have a choice? Who's ultimately responsible for the way things went? If Longstreet had obeyed and done what he was supposed to do when he was supposed to do it, could history have turned dramatically? Books have been written on the what if the Union would have lost that battle. And it forces you to think about plans, our plans, and who's really responsible, who's really in charge, and the effect of our plans and our decisions as we make choices throughout life. A lot of you here today are right in the middle of this, where you're thinking about plans for your own life, you're thinking about your own future, your own trajectory, and you're wondering, okay, so what career should I choose? Some of our young men and women just graduated from high school, some of you graduated from college, and you're thinking about this, like this is right in your face. What career should I choose? What should I be doing for the rest of my life? How should I be using my gifts and my talents to the best of my ability? Is this the right price for the home I want to buy? Should I marry this guy? He kind of creeps me out. The answer is no. Should I marry them? Should I pursue them? Is this a waste of time to even try to court this person? Should I bust my tail to go for that promotion? Or should I relax and spend more time with my family? Should I, I've got good, potential good here or potential good there. Which good is actually more good? What do I go after? Is this the right person to hire? I want to fill this position. I need to fill this position, but I've got nobody else, and I'm not sure if this is the right fit for this person. How do I care for my aging parent? Should we have another baby or not? Not us. I'm talking about you. Should we move? Should I move out of my parents' place and actually launch, on my own? Or should I keep saving? This is a great opportunity for me to save money, to be financially prudent. And you've been asking me some of these questions. As your pastor, I've been delighted to have some of these conversations with you. A lot of us, we have this on our minds. How do I know what's next? How do I know how to determine what's next? How do I know that I'm following God's will? How do I find God's will? Some of us feel paralyzed. Some of us feel altogether too at ease. Here's the good news. When you look carefully and do a balanced study on plans and planning in the book of Proverbs, you find this wonderful mix of motivational drive and restful security. And it's matchless. It's wonderful. My hope is that one of two things might happen. On one hand, I hope that our study this morning would be incredibly freeing for some of you who struggle with fearing that you don't know what God's will is for your life, paralyzed by the thought that you might not go in the exact right direction. This study, I hope, would free you in a lot of ways. On the other hand, my hope is that some of you would really wake up, that some of you are just doing your own thing. You're going along, you're making all kinds of decisions, you're spending money, you're spending time, you're spending years of your life giving zero thought to how what you're doing fits into God's mission. Some of you would have to look back over the last month of your life, and if you said, okay, what did you do to participate in the mission of God in the world, the redemptive mission of God in the world? You would have to honestly say zero. And yet, you call yourselves Christ followers, and you would aspire to being a part of his redemptive plan, and yet there's nothing evident about that. So I would hope that our study, would kick some of us in the pants and set some of us at ease. In order to wrap our minds and our hearts and even our calendars around this, we're going to look at the mystery of plans first, who and what are under whose control. Then we're going to look at the clarity of plans very briefly, what we know for sure, and then we're going to look, lastly, how to plan. And I want to tell you, we're going to spend a good bit of time on this first point on purpose, because if you get the why, if you get the kind of the foundation, the underneath of it, then the application of it, the living out of it, becomes a lot more clear and readily available and readily understandable. So there's some mystery in here that's actually necessary for you to get through to that freedom and to that security. You have to work through the mystery of it. There's some unknown, there's some unrevealed, and there's some mystery that you kind of paradoxically have to understand, or have to at least just understand what you don't understand, even to enjoy in order for you to break through to the restful and exhilarating part of planning. So let's look first at the mystery. Number one, the mystery of who is in control. The mystery of who is in control. Look at these passages back to back with me. Proverbs 21, verse 5, and there in your chapter, Proverbs 16, verse 33. I have these on the board behind me. Proverbs 21:5 says, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes to poverty." In Proverbs 16:33, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." So if you were to ask these two passages, if you were to just single one of them out and say, so who's in charge? You would have completely different answers, right? If you looked at the first one and you would say, well, the diligent person, right? The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance. Everyone who's hasty comes only to poverty. It's up to, like, our plans, our actions, our choices determine our future. Proverbs 16:33 says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." So who's planning? Who's calling the shots? Are we? Is God? The answer is yes. And that paradox is this beautiful aspect of the Christian life that in a moment is going to make so much sense. Number one, plans are determined by my good diligence. Plans are determined by my good diligence. That verse, Proverbs 21:5. "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty." The word diligent in this passage can also mean strategic. So in other words, if you plan, if you work hard to execute that plan, if you're strategic, life will go better. On the other hand, if you don't plan, if you're passive, if you just let life happen to you, or if you're hasty, or if you're impulsive, like the verse says here, if you just wing it every time, and you're making last-minute impulsive decisions, life will probably not go as well for you as it ought to, or as it could. Some of us really resonate with this, right? Some of us are major planners. I've heard some in this room say, by the time I'm 29, I'm going to have an established career. I'm going to buy a house. I'll probably have a mortgage. I'm going to read at least 10 books a year. I've got, and then by the time I'm 49, I'm going to pay off my mortgage. I'm going to travel to at least 3 continents. I'm going to go on a mission trip every summer if I can. This is what I'm going to do. I've got things planned out. Some of you tend to operate like that. On the other hand, we've got some in this room that are like, you know what? I'm 29. I should probably get a job. Maybe I should start thinking about, like that. And that's true. Of some of us, we're just on the total opposite end of the spectrum. So let me challenge you here. Proverbs would say there are 2 types of people in the world: the wise and the fool. Let me say this lovingly. It would also say one of those people are planners. And that's the wise. So you can do the rest of the math yourself. If you don't plan, you are not wise. It is wise to be diligent. It is wise to plan. It is wise to be thoughtful and strategic about your life. You have X amount of years. You have X amount of breaths in your lungs. Are you spending them wisely for your King, especially? But second, let's put this in balance, perspective. Second, plans are determined by God's good providence. Plans are determined by God's good providence. Proverbs 16:33. "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. Lot casting was just like flipping a coin, right? Or just like drawing straws. Some of them are the more contemporary ways of kind of making a decision by a means, a tool of some sort. Who's going to plow the bigger field? They would cast lots for it. Who's going to take the first night shift? In those days, they would cast lots for something like that. And here, Solomon actually personifies what we assume is this thing of total chance, this mindless thing of chance. And he says every decision that the cast lots make, right? He's personifying. He's kind of putting almost like an active a will in this. Every decision that the flipping coin makes, every one is actually from the Lord. Every one of those decisions is determined by God. So what's he saying? Every little detail, even the smallest of details, who takes the night shift, right? Who plows the bigger field, even the smallest of things is all fixed by God's plan. Now, the human mind often doesn't know how to put these two things together, that plans are determined by my good diligence and that plans are determined by God's good providence. That I have significant amounts of freedom and responsibility, that my decisions actually matter and make a difference in my future, that my future is able to be shaped and affected by me and by my choices, and at the same time that everything that happens is completely under God's control. So this morning, I got up, I put on my shoes, I tied my shoes, and I chose to tie my right shoe first. Did God know that I was going to tie my right shoe first? Yes. He is a sovereign, he is all-knowing, and he knows everything since before time began. He knew that I was going to tie my right shoe first. So, if he already knew that, did I really have a choice? If it was fixed, did I have a choice as to which shoe I tied first? Right, that's kind of in a way it's a straw man argument, but that's kind of the crux of how we feel sometimes when it comes to putting these two things together. We feel almost, it can lend toward feeling almost hopeless, almost purposeless if we're not careful. But look at this, how this is spelled out. This is not how the Bible sees this. We're told we're absolutely free and absolutely determined at the same time. Proverbs 16:9 says, "The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." So there's human plans and divine sovereignty at the self-same time. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." So in other words, your plans are yours. Your choices are yours. You are responsible for them. No one is forcing you. God is not forcing you in any direction. Do you see, if you do something stupid, that's on you. If you do something wicked, that's on you. If you're being selfish, that's on you. And the bad consequences, those are also on you. People are going to hold you accountable, and they should. God is going to hold you accountable, and he should. At the very same time, while your choices belong 100% to God, or 100% to you, God is 100% in control. Nothing on earth has ever happened that he did not allow. Now, like I said, in the human mind struggles with this. We've forever struggled with this. Let me give you some references from pop culture as to how we've even wrestled through some of these things. Back in the 90s, there was a movie that came out called The Matrix. And then the very first part of this trilogy in The Matrix, the main character, Neo, who is in effect, he's kind of a Christ type in this movie. He goes to visit the Oracle, a woman who can see dimensions that others can't see. Supposedly, she can see into the future, and she tells people what they need to hear in order that they might more fully fulfill their role in existence. And at one point, Neo's standing in her kitchen, and she says to Neo, "Oh, and don't worry about the vase." And he says, "What vase?" And as he does, he turns around, to look, and with his elbow knocks over this vase that falls to the floor, crashes on the floor. There's glass, there's water, there's flowers at his feet. And she says, that vase. And he says, but how did you know? And I think she doesn't answer the question. She instead says, what's really going to cook your noodle later on is, would you have broken it if I hadn't said anything? And she just kind of lets that hang there. And the premise of the movie is that your future is fixed. No matter what you do, you're going to fulfill what is already said that is going to happen about your life. No matter what you choose, what's going to happen is going to happen. Now flip to another pop cultural reference. There's another movie that came out, I think back in the 80s, called Back to the Future, with Marty McFly and Doc Brown. I don't know if you remember this, but Doc Brown has figured out a way to travel through time, and he and Marty McFly are on this mission, and at one point, and I won't spoil it, Marty's looking at a photo of his family, but because of certain things that were happening as they were like traveling through time and like affecting things that were happening, because of something that was happening, he was looking at the photo, and one of the characters in the photo begins to fade away out of existence. And they start to panic and say, we got to fix this. We got to do something because this isn't like this can't happen, right? This person, like this, we need to undo what's been done. And so it begins this adventure of trying to like undo the effects of this person's disappearance, because if they mess up the time-space continuum, then this life won't happen. And so at the end of the trilogy of movies, Doc Brown explains the message of the entire trilogy, and he says, and I don't know if you remember, do you remember what he says? He says, your future is whatever you make it, so make it a good one. So that's the total opposite message or idea of determinism and choice and planning and plans. And that's what our current pop culture loves to believe. The Matrix is mainly based on Eastern thought. Back to the Future is totally American. Your future is not set, it's not written, it's whatever you make it. So make it a good one. It's all up to you. You can do whatever you want. You can be whatever you can go wherever you want to go. You can create whatever you want to create. It's all in your hands. Here's the problem. If you're a thinking person, if you take either one of those ideas to its extreme ends, which usually we do, we either buy into one or the other, or we just kind of mindlessly find ourselves somewhere in the middle. But if you believe one of those, but not both of those, you're in trouble. You have some incredibly difficult and crippling realities that you're confronted with that you have to get over if you think about it. For instance, if you believe that everything's fixed, no matter what you do or what you decide, then ultimately, you'll have no motivation. You'll have no reason. You'll be totally passive, even cynical. Like, why bother? Who cares? It's all going to happen anyway. It's all going to pan out anyway. I don't have any choice in the matter. I'm going to be the puppet of fate that I am. On the other hand, if you believe that nothing is fixed, that everything is up to you, like Doc Brown says, that everything is on your shoulders, that your future is completely set by your choices, if you're a thinking person, you're going to be scared to death. It's all on you. You'll be crushed and immobilized by the millions of options that you right now have available to you and that you're missing out on right now. And the weight of every worse option that you've ever chosen bears down only on you. But here's what's so wonderful. The Bible teaches, as much as it's intellectually difficult to grapple with, it is so utterly practical and wonderfully freeing. Because God is complex, and God is completely in control. Because of that truth, you and I can relax. And you can take a deep breath. And you can joyfully love His sovereignty. And you can emotionally and spiritually rest in His sovereignty. And because, at the very same time, because you are completely responsible for your actions and your decisions, you have motivation. because what you do matters. How you spend your time, how you spend your money, how you spend your energy, all of that matters, and you will be held accountable for that in great ways. You're going to be rewarded for that in great ways. So you have joy-filled freedom and you have joy-filled motivation. And that, there's nothing else, there's no other system of thought in the world other than outside of the Bible that sees these things as clearly and holds these things in this paradoxical tension that actually frees the human heart to enjoy both the freedom and the motivation to serve God well. And that's the reason why the Apostle Paul could act the way he did when he was on mission. There's this great story in Acts chapter 16. Let me read this for you. In Acts chapter 16, Paul's on his first missionary journey, and he comes face to face with some decisions. He's trying to serve the Lord. He's trying to share the hope of Jesus Christ with other people. And here's what happens in Acts 16. He says, "And they went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia." So do you hear what's happening there? God's saying, nope, I'm going to close this door. I'm going to close this opportunity. You're not going to go there. Not in Asia. Verse 7, "And when they had come up to Mysia, they attempted to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them." So again, another closed door. So, passing by Mysia, they went down to Troas. And there a vision appeared to Paul in the night. A man of Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." When Paul had seen the vision, immediately he sought to go on to Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. Here's the crazy part, and I don't have time to read the whole chapter. When they get to Macedonia, they never meet the man. This Macedonian man that appeared to Paul, they never meet a man. They meet a woman named Lydia, and Paul says, "This is it. This is my open door." Lydia was receptive to the gospel. They planted a church there, and that ministry continued to thrive for years. Paul, when he got to Macedonia, on his own, made his own decision. He looked around and said, where are the religious people going to gather? That's the people I want to talk to, people who are spiritually sensitive. That would be most strategic. And so it's this wonderful mix of God saying, nope, I'm not going to have you here. No, I'm not going to have you here. And Paul, at the same time, he didn't have a meltdown, right? He was perfectly free to say, all right, I'm going to keep using the brain that God's given me to make wise decisions to keep going on this mission. And I'm not going to get disheartened. I'm going to take joy in the fact that he's in control. And I'm going to take joy in the fact that I've got something to do. And I'm going to do it, no matter what. And so Paul's heart was totally at ease, totally free, while at the same time being driven and never giving up. And that's the kind of mindset that this balance invites you into and frees you into, which is just wonderful for the human mind. So let's keep moving. So now let's look at the mystery of what is under control. So that's who is in control, the mystery of what is under control. And the answer is evil as well as good. Look at Proverbs 16, verse 4. Proverbs 16, verse 4. "The Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble." Do you know what it's saying? It's saying, not only are the little things part of God's plan, he says everything for its purpose, but the bad things are still a part of God's plan. If you're thinking through what we're learning here, if you don't keep these things in balance, if you think we have no choice, that God determines everything, it'd be easy to say, man, then God must be the author of evil also, if he's the only determining factor. Then I had no choice but to sin yesterday when I said that thing, because he knew it and he was in control. I'm just a puppet, right? God's the one doing all the evil in the world. If you're on that extreme end, do you see where that drives you to? That nope, it's just totally on God. Then he's the culprit. But that's not the case. Our plans are our plans. Our choices are ours. Evil deeds belong to the evildoer. And they are responsible for their evil deeds. We are responsible for our evil choices. God never tempts anyone to sin. God never forces anyone to sin. And yet, and we love this truth, in his awesome goodness, even the worst of what we've done is still able to be worked into and woven into his good plan. Not a single act of evil is allowed outside of God's will. Not a single act of evil is able to thwart God's will. But he's not responsible for a single act of evil. We are. A perfect example of this is Joseph in the book of Genesis. Do you remember the story of Joseph? He was one of many brothers. His dad was messing things up big time by showing major favoritism to him, and he wasn't making it any better by boasting in some of the ways that he was, and he was kind of foolishly rubbing his favored position in his brothers' faces, and they hated him for it. They despised him for it, so much so that they ended up dragging him out into a field, selling him. They threw him in a pit until these slave traders came by. They sold him into slavery and just were rid of him, and they took this bloodied garment back to Dad and said, he's dead. And let's just move on. But they couldn't, right? Their hearts were a wreck. Their minds were a wreck as a result of what had happened. And this haunted them for years. And when he was a slave in Egypt, things got worse for Joseph. Everything he did, it seemed like at every turn, good things would happen, and then something worse would happen. Something good would happen, something even worse would happen, right? So he was falsely accused of rape. He was betrayed by friends who promised to help him when he was in prison. He was forgotten down there for years. And all that injustice and hatred and scorn and neglect, he faced it all, right? And all the while, God was aware. All the while, God was with him. Yet, all the while, God seemed silent. And finally, he gets a break. He gets released from jail. He gets a chance to prove his wisdom. And he, as a broken man, dependent, so completely dependent on God, for the words that he spoke, for the actions that he took, so dependent on God, he comes to Pharaoh, who has this decision to make. He has this horrible dream where his land is in peril. Joseph, by God's wisdom, interprets the dream. Pharaoh sees the wisdom in him and says, I want to promote you. Like beyond what is even logical. I want to promote you and put you in charge because you can see something that I can't see. And only because of all those bad things, Joseph became who he became. And Joseph was where he was. And as a result, God, like I said, he promoted Joseph. He healed their family. When the brothers came to him in need, he healed their family. He saved thousands of lives, all because of those bad things. And in the end, Joseph was able to make this fantastic summary, this now famous summary, where he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. What does that mean? It means never, ever think God is not working, no matter how much it seems like he's absent. It also means never ever think that you've got God figured out, that you're going to be able to figure out what he's up to. You may never. It's only at the end, and sometimes like at the very, very end of all life, that we may see clearly what he is up to. God works mysteriously, but God works constantly. So do you see it? So that's why Proverbs 16:3 pushes us to this end, which is what we're going to get into next. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. So that's what's mysterious. Let me just very briefly talk about what's clear. What's clear is that all we plan for God's glory. That's the ideal. God is about his glory. We are created for his glory. Everything we do, everything we plan, we should be planning with God in mind. And everything so if you're thinking about where should I buy a home, one of your questions ought to be, Lord, where could you most use me as a missionary? I want to be a missionary to those people, to this neighborhood. If you're thinking about what should I do in in my endeavors at work? Like, how should I treat my coworkers? Is there something I could, like, you should be thinking, well, the conversations that I want to have over the lunch break or at the water cooler or whatever, like, those conversations are going to be strategic because I'm going to be thinking like a missionary. I'm going to be living out my redemptive mission that God's given the church to make disciples of all nations. So all we plan for God's glory. And then all God's plans work together for our good. Now that doesn't mean that he's out for our glory. That's not our glory. It's our good. It's his glory, our good. Those things are clear all throughout Scripture. So we see the mystery, we see the clarity. Now let's talk about how to plan wisely. And basically, this is just the application of the first point, that we work diligently, right? So let's talk about how to plan wisely. How do I wisely live out my part? How do I live out this truth that plans are determined by my good diligence? What are the marks? What are the characteristics of those wise plans? So number one, plan good. And that's not bad grammar. Number one is plan good. God delights to bless good plans. And so we need to plan to do good. Proverbs 16:3, which I just referenced, says, "Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established." Now, what's interesting about this verse is that you'd think that it would be the other way around, that it would say, "Commit your plans to the Lord, and your work will be established." Like if in your planning you make sure that God's front and center, then all of the details God's going to iron out, right? But it doesn't. It says commit your work to the Lord. You be faithful. You know what you need to be doing right in this next moment, in this next decision. You be faithful, right? And then your plans will be established. I'm going to open doors for you. I'm going to help take care of. I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to give you more and more options. I'm going to be right here walking you through the entire thing. But the key of it is that you would be saying, I want to do what God wants me to do, and I'm going to live faithfully with what God's given me to be faithful with. I'm going to be a good steward of my time. I'm going to be a good steward with my resources and how I plan to live them out. Not my will, but His be done. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. Proverbs 16:7 says, "When a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him." God delights to bless good plans. That's why St. Augustine could say, "Love God and do whatever you please." If your motive is right, if your motive is such that you're thinking, in all of my planning, I want to make sure that He's front and center. In all of my planning, I want to make sure that I'm being obedient to Him. If that part is proper, and if that's aligned, do whatever you want. Because the motive is already proper. The motive is already there. Number two, so don't just plan good, plan smart. Number two is plan smart. Proverbs 13:16 says, "Every prudent man acts with knowledge, but a fool flaunts his folly." So in other words, act with knowledge. As you make plans, as you seek to know God's will and follow God's will, don't be a dummy, right? Don't be intellectually lazy. Do your best to learn everything you can in order to make an informed decision. Plan smart. Right? So, you know what? Let me just keep moving for time's sake. Number three, plan humbly. Plan humbly. Proverbs 27, verse 1. "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring." Proverbs 27:1. God expects us to use our brains and to make plans, but He also expects us to recognize our limitations. We're not all-knowing. We are not all-powerful. This is almost definitely the passage that James had in mind when he wrote in James chapter 4. He wrote, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. So again, think of the whole context here, because you have to put this in perspective of what we've already talked about. We need to plan humbly, but we need to plan. We need to plan humbly. It's not wrong to plan. It's wise to plan. It's not even wrong to get excited about a plan or to even to feel confident. This is going to work. This is going to happen. I'm excited. We're going to do this thing. I'm going to take my company to that next level. I can see it clearly. This is going to happen. I'm going to get my family to that point. We're going to get through. We're going to wipe out our finances here. Our debt here. We're going to be financially stable by this point. This is going to happen. That's okay to think and to even plan and to put confidence in that direction. What he's talking about here is this motive where he says, at some point, that becomes mingled with this idea that you are actually the ultimate control. And he says, if that thought ever is kind of like flirting with your mind, what you're flirting with is the idea that you're taking the place of God himself. So just be humble and recognize it's always, always, always dependent upon God. I am a contingent being, and my every move depends on him. So that's why Winston Churchill would say, plans are futile, but planning is essential. Right? We recognize life changes, things change. You can make a plan, you can execute the plan. It almost never works out perfectly, but you have to have a plan in order to move forward. But you do so humbly and with flexibility. Number 4, I want to add one to the bottom of this list. I think this is important as I was studying this week. Number 4 is plan with others. Plan with others as much as it is possible. Proverbs 15, verse 22 says, without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. Or you could look at Proverbs 20, verse 18. Plans are established by counsel. By wise guidance, wage war. So if experienced generals sought counsel and seek counsel as they wage war, shouldn't I seek counsel as we wage the battles of our own lives, as we make decisions that affect not only us but others that we care for? It's dangerous to rely on our own wisdom and experience and to ignore the wisdom, to ignore the earned experience that others have and have successfully walked before us, especially those who have walked in the Lord. Proverbs 12:15 says, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. So plan with others. Use others as your sounding board. Now, God has a plan for his people. He's always had a plan for his people. And if you look through Scripture, there's this thread that's woven all throughout that God plans for his people rest. And you see it in the promise, the covenant that he makes with them, and he says, I want to give you a land. I want to give you a home. I'm going to take care of you. You're going to be my people. I want to be your God. And I'm going to give you rest. And then when we see Israel actually enter into the promised land, he continues this theme until when Christ comes. We see the one who finally earned that rest for us, that spiritual place of rest and shalom, peace for us. If you go forward to the book of Hebrews, God says, all of that was pointing even further ahead to this ultimate rest, this ultimate promised land, which we are continuing to strive for, to enter into, that's now made available, the way has been opened because of Jesus Christ. Here's the beautiful thing. That rest was made possible because of work. That rest was made possible because of planning. Jesus came and walked the earth. John chapter 6, John chapter 4 talk about this very concisely, very beautifully, where Jesus says, I have come to do my Father's will. I am, in other words, He's got a plan, and I'm going to do it. And nothing can stop me. And I'm totally free to accomplish it. He is the ultimate picture of what planning and living with a plan, living with a mission ought to look like. And because he was faithful, and because he did it, and because on the night he was betrayed, had this moment where he cries out to God and says, if there's any other way, I will take it. But he says, not my will, but yours be done. And because he followed through and accomplished God's plan, you and I are free to follow him now and to do that same thing, to be able to live fully and freely as those who have been forgiven, who have been won into the kingdom, and at the same time be completely driven and motivated to get things done for his glory because of how much he's done for us. I would pray, like I said, that for some of us this morning, this would be a great kick in the pants to get yourself motivated. And for others of us, to free us from the fear and the paralysis of overanalyzing and wondering if we could ever fully find God's will. Will you pray with me? Our Lord, our hearts, man, we need to be reminded of these truths. It's so good to remember that we're not in control, that you are sovereign God. You are overseeing and lovingly caring for and planning everything out and executing that plan. It's such a good reminder to our hearts that you don't need us to accomplish what you're going to accomplish. And Lord, man, how freeing it is, how life-giving it is to have this grace-born motive to get after it and to do good things for your glory. Lord, I pray, would you help us to walk this balance, to enjoy this tension, to enjoy this paradox, and to walk this well. I ask this in the name of Christ, our Savior, our example in this sense. Amen.